And I just sort of dismissed it as a crank call from, and I got a lot of those at the time trying to find out what happened to my brother. And then about June or July 1996, I see an article in the Los Angeles Times talking about a man named Richard Lee Guthrie, who had been found hanging in his cell in federal custody. And it was the day before Guthrie had said that he was going to give an interview to the Los Angeles Times that would blow the lid off the Oklahoma City bombing. And it just simply said that Guthrie belonged to a group of bank robbers. And I didn't focus much on Guthrie. There was no photograph of Guthrie either. And then shortly before his death, I received a message from Tim McVeigh, who told me, he said, when I saw your brother's picture and heard what happened to him, I want you to know that, in my opinion, he was murdered by the FBI because they mistook him for Richard Lee Guthrie. And I looked at a photograph of Guthrie, and Guthrie looked very similar to my brother. But what really brought all the pieces together was a phone call from a reporter named J.D. Cash, who had followed the Oklahoma City bombing from the moment it happened. He was a reporter in eastern Oklahoma. He'd had family and friends killed in the bombing. And it was in 2003, I believe, or 2004, when I received a call from J.D., and he said, if you got a minute, I'd like to talk to you about your brother. And I said, sure. And what J.D. said was, describe your brother. And I said, well, he was, J.D. said, well, how tall was he? And I said, he's about 5'8", 5'9". J.D. said, what was his build like? I said, he was a very powerfully built man. Complexion, I said, he was dark complected. A mustache, yes, he had a mustache. Where was he when he was picked up? And I said, well, he was coming back across the border from Mexico. He'd been down to visit some friends down there. And his wife's family, she's Mexican-American, a citizen in the United States, but still had family in Baja, California. And J.D. said, what was he driving? And I said, a mid-1980s, a 1986 Chevrolet pickup truck. And J.D. said, did he have any tattoos? And I said, yes. And J.D. said, what kind? And I said, he had a dragon tattoo. And J.D. said, where? And I said, on his left forearm. And J.D. said, oh, shit. He said, you better sit down. I said, I'm sitting down. And he said, let me tell you this. He said, the largest manhunt in American history was for John Doe 2. It was occurring at the time your brother was arrested. And J.D. said, this is the description of John Doe 2. White male, powerful upper body build, 5'8", 5'9", dark complected, believed to be in Canada or Mexico, driving mid-1980s Chevrolet pickup truck, dragon tattoo, left forearm. And that's when it all came together. That they had mistaken my brother for someone else. And that someone else was Richard Lee Guthrie, who was a perfect match, I found out later, for my brother, down to the dragon tattoo on his left forearm. As they said, Guthrie ended up hanging, supposedly suicide, in his cell while in the custody of the FBI. We had an eyewitness to my brother's murder, an inmate named Alden Gildas Baker. A month before we were going to go to this trial, Baker supposedly hangs himself in his cell while under FBI custody. Again, another suicide. And all of that.
So what year did this conversation take place again?
Which one?
The one with J.D. Cash.
About 2003, early 2004.
And did he say what prompted him at that time to come forward and ask you about your brother?
He had been suspicious all along about my brother's death, and he had followed the story in the paper about the missing evidence, the destruction of evidence. They had made 2 attempts, the federal government had to indict me during this, trying to find out what happened to my brother. And he always thought that there was something there. And I don't know what prompted him other than that to call, but he did call, and we had that conversation.
They attempted to indict you.
Yes.
That's remarkable.
That's not. That's typically what the government does, I found out, to get rid of someone who is an irritant. And I was an irritant then. I'd like to think that I'm more than an irritant now.
So what kind of steps were you taking at the time to find out more about your brother?
I started, once after J.D.'s conversation, I started to file Freedom of Information Act requests for information linking Guthrie to the bombing, because then I would have it. I mean, if I had Guthrie, if I could prove that Guthrie was John Doe too, then it was clearly the motive for the murder, the torture murder of my brother. And I would tell your audience, if you go look at that website on my brother, you'll be shocked. The pictures are gruesome as to what was done to him, down to his cutting his throat. And he was strangled with you'll see on the website, he was strangled with a pair of plastic handcuffs after he'd been beaten and tortured for information he didn't have. But I've been helped, and so what happened along the way by people I don't even know, and I had been leaked 2 teletypes from then FBI Director Louis Freeh to his field offices in Oklahoma, in I believe Omaha, and then Kansas City. There were several FBI field offices this memo had gone to, and it was an FBI informant reporting that 2 days before the bombing, Tim McVeigh had called this white supremacist compound in eastern Oklahoma called Elohim City, asking for more help. And it had been reported to the FBI, and they hadn't stopped the bombing. I was leaked a sealed transcript from a federal court proceeding in which another informant was testifying that she had gone and scouted the target, the Murrah building, with McVeigh and others, 4 months before the bombing had occurred. And if it were, they were going to blow up the Murrah building. And the government never stopped it. So I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for documents, which it occurred to me that what we were dealing here with was a sting operation run by the FBI. I've since discovered that the FBI actually had an operation called PATCON, Patriot Conspiracy, and they used it to infiltrate the militia movement in this country. And suspecting that what had happened here was an effort to infiltrate the militia, to incite them to try to do something illegal and arrest them, I thought that was the plan the FBI had at this instance. And I thought that for a number of reasons, but not only from what I saw in terms of evidence, but from what had happened previously. The FBI had botched the Ruby Ridge situation. Waco was a disaster for them. They were having such pressure put upon them by the American people, the media, and Congress, that they needed something to save their face, to restore their image and their credibility. And what I think happened is they set up this PATCON operation. The objective was to incite some act of insurrection or violence by the militia movement against the federal government,